Item 15, tree risk assessment update. So I just want to welcome our staff to here, and also just to let the committee know that the Western Springs Forest, Friends of Western Springs Forest, sent through what they wanted, and I have accepted that. I am tabling it now, and it'll be available in Nexus and also will be attached to the minutes. So this particular document is the one that we have here. So look, tēnā kōrua, I'm going to ask our Director for Customer and Community Services to lead off, and then I'll end up going through. We have a mover and a seconder for that. I will move this particular item and Deputy Mayor Cashmore will second it. So it's put on the table for discussion. Thank you. Yeah. All yours.
Kia ora, thank you, Alf, and tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today an important update about our risk assessment process for trees. The reason why I'm starting this conversation is that there has been a referral of a paper that was submitted to the Audit and Risk Committee, and they referred the recommendations for the PACE Committee to follow up on this item, as the PACE Committee is typically involved in any matters relating to community facilities and parks. What firstly I'd like to do is acknowledge our team, and particularly the team from Risk and Assurance Services, who have been working a bit more independently from our teams to look at what we need to do and how we can do things better. I would also like to acknowledge members of the community, some of whom are here today, for actually submitting information and providing feedback. This is a very complex topic, and the challenge we have with tree risk assessment is that there is no single one answer that gives us clarity on necessarily the best approach to take. And what we find is that there are multiple tools that people use, some that are developed by companies themselves, and there are often internal disagreements or disagreements across parties about which are the most appropriate tools to use. So this is a challenge that councils are facing across New Zealand, because we have a really important obligation around dealing with not only our ngahere and protecting our trees, most importantly now, and even more importantly given climate change requirements, but we also have obligations regarding health and safety and the safety of our public. And so what we are trying to do is constantly balance the tensions that we see in some of these instances. And the methodologies that are available to us help inform the decisions that we then need to make with our elected members in the particular communities where these risks exist. In terms of what you're going to hear today is that there are a small number of slides. They will cover off the types of methodologies that exist, including to assess trees. It will cover off the work that our risk team did to assess how well we're applying those and any recommendations they have. And then we will also cover any recommendations that we have going forward to improve any of our practices. And Rod Sheridan, who is our General Manager of Community Facilities, is kindly here today to provide some information on that. The important thing to note is that because this is not an exact science, it is really important for us to follow continuous quality improvement practices. We need to learn about what we can do better. We need to hear feedback from our communities, our elected members. We need to look at the latest scientific techniques that may be evolving. And we foresee that the management and the approaches we continue to take around tree assessment will continue to change over time as we adopt new ideas, new methodologies, and adapt to new environments. So that's all from me, and I would like to now introduce Emma Mosley, our Chief Risk Officer. Thank you very much, Emma.
Kia ora tātou, everybody, and thank you, Claudia, for the introduction. Yes, my name's Emma Mosley. I think everyone here has heard from me before with my current hat on as Chief Risk Officer acting. I have become a bit of an expert, or a burgeoning expert in trees in the last little while. It's a very, very important area, and I've been very grateful that we have been able to run alongside the community facilities and community services team, working with a wide range of people. As Claudia says, there's been a big team involved in getting across these important issues and working on a way forward, looking forward. So today, we'll keep this brief. I'll take the report as read. I know that there'll be lots of good questions coming, so we'll allow plenty of time for that. My part of the presentation really is just to briefly talk about the industry standards available for tree risk assessment, current practice that we have taken a look at over the last little while, and the work that we've recommended and that we will be doing to document the processes and improve our practices. So, at its simplest, tree risk assessments are a formalised method of identifying and analysing and evaluating risks. Without a set way of doing this, we might take different views and come to inconsistent decisions that don't appropriately consider all the factors and get the right outcome, as Claudia has said. And all risk assessments at their heart are about thinking about likelihood and consequence and balancing that up. There are different ways, as Claudia says, of undertaking risk assessments that meet the risk management standard, and I don't want to bamboozle you with numbers, but there is an international standard, ISO 31000-2018, which we've looked at, and that guides how we think about these things. There are quantitative and qualitative and blends of tools and approaches that can be taken. And as Claudia has already mentioned, there is currently today no definitive one tree risk management sector tool and regulation in place. So that means it's a challenge, but it also means it's an opportunity, because it means we can look at everything that's available and look at our circumstance and our challenges and work out what is best for us and our communities. We also have guidance available that comes not just from standards, but also from our legal requirements and from recent learnings out of circumstances through the coroner and other important considerations that we have to factor in to this consideration. So the commonly used methods and tools are summarised in the report, and I'm aware that there has been a question about whether the ones that are in there are the ones. Are they really risk assessment tools? Why have we listed those ones? There are many. There are new ones coming. There are different views about which methods and tools are best and should be used in any particular circumstance. And I believe that's healthy. That's actually good. It means that we're constantly reviewing and challenging what works best for trees and the assessments. The methods and tools that are listed fall into three different groupings. So they're not all, the language is tricky. You can talk about them as standards or methodologies, but there's a group of ways of assessing trees that are qualitative. And then there's the quantitative tool, where you can put in different data, set hard thresholds and triggers, appetites, for example, and they'll spit you out an answer, depending on what you put in. And then there's a blend. So there's different things that you can use. They all have their strengths, and talking to different experts, some have more strengths and more weaknesses, or pros and cons, depending. And as we've said, arborists use different tools depending on their preferences and circumstances. So we wanted to be clear that today and the conversation is about community facilities tree risk scope. So we are not talking about public trees that might be on land in our regional parks or our Auckland Botanical Gardens, which are managed by separate parts of council, or trees on land managed by co-governance entities, or importantly, trees on private property, who are the responsibility of those private owners. So as I say, my team has had the opportunity to come in and support CF and run alongside and really have a look at what we are currently doing. And that means they've had a lot of questions from us, and we've had a lot of time to look at the feedback that's been coming in from the community, but also internally amongst the different experts that we have in the team who really care about trees, and they know a lot about them, and so we've been talking a lot with them as well. We've also had a look at what other councils are doing and looked overseas and internationally where there is a growing body of work around tree risk assessment and tree management generally. And we've come to the general conclusion that there is a real opportunity here to work on documenting what we do so that we can be very clear and open and transparent with everybody about what we do. And we can perhaps dig down into some of these questions about which tool, when, what do we do, and make sure we have robust, effective risk management happening every day across our whole beautiful Tamaki Makaurau. So I won't go on any further. I could give you chapter and verse about VTA and QTRA and all the alphabet soup that is in this world. I'm happy to answer questions on all of that, but I guess the general message from us today is that we've had a look. We think we are generally consistent with the standards and the methods and the practices that are out there. Our teams are doing hard mahi, making these risk assessments and doing this work. We have room to improve, and we are proposing that we do that with the work that's underway already to document and work through a document which is an operation guide which can apply to both staff and our contractors. I'll hand over to Rod now to talk about that piece and community facilities process going forward.
Yeah, kia ora koutou, and thank you, Emma, and through the chair. Look, we are, this is a real important topic for us, for our communities, for our elected members, and for our residents, obviously. So we are committed here to work through an operational document that documents all the processes that we actually go through to make decisions around tree removal, but how we operate as a whole in our tree management across our area. You know, we are open to continuous improvement in this. What we are finding through this process has been said by Claudia and by Emma is that there is no one system that we can use that quantifies and makes these decisions. What we use with our visual tree assessment process is we run through a process which is a very intense process, and we then use expert contractors to come in, and they use different types of systems to actually help evaluate the tree risk. We thank the residents of Western Springs for their feedback, and we note their correspondence last night, and we will be addressing all of those items in our operational plans, how we go through to make sure we've covered all of those things off. We don't think we'll ever get to a stage of nominating one system. I think we need to be able to use a number of different systems when we actually have a number of different tools that relate to what area we are managing and what the tree risk is at that time, because I think there's keeping that flexibility is a better process for us as an organisation. We have in-house arborists. We have 10 qualified and passionate arborists who are passionate about trees and the environment out there, and they want to make sure that they are doing the right thing and making the right decisions for our communities and making sure that we look after our ngāhere as a whole. So look, we are committed to actually getting this process documented. We believe that we will have that in a draft by around December, and then peer reviewed and hopefully back to this committee as an update. So we hope to update you in December around where we're up to, and then from that we'll have it peer reviewed and by experts and external people, and have it in play by around back to the committee as an update in February next year. It's a pretty tight time frame, but we've got a lot of it underway now, and we want to continue that process through this. So look, happy to take any questions. I could go on, but I think it's best to get some questions out of the way, and we can give you the assurance that we are open to certainly a continuous improvement process through this system process.
Yeah, ngā mihi kōrua, but there's 2 more slides. I know there's the next steps.
Oh, sorry.
So if we get through the next 2 slides, that'll be great. So, yeah, ka pai.
So look, this is the next step. So we'll draft the operational process for tree management for Community Facilities Department, and the Customer and Community Services proposed to update the local boards forum and the Parks, Arts and Community and Events Committee on our progress. And we're thinking that work will be in December this year as an update, and then hopefully have a target of completion by February next year once we've had a chance to get some expert peer review done. Ka
pai, ngā mihi. Look, just to give you some guidance in regards to the questions in that, as you saw on the PowerPoint, it's got nothing to do, this risk assessment is, I will not entertain any questions around Canal Road because it's private property. I will not entertain any questions on the Tupuna Maunga because they're under statute. I will not entertain any questions around the Western Springs process because that is a separate process. And as we've always been told, that process is going to continue. This is around the tree risk assessment, and that covers us. So I'm not going to entertain any of those particular questions. And Claudia, you mentioned our whānau at the back, so I just want to mihi to you all as well. No, that's you 3. You're the only 3 in the public that's still there. So I just want to mihi to you, Wallace. So look, I'm going to open it up in questions first, please, and that is Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Claudia, thank you for what you said at the start, because I think that set the picture. Emma and Rod, great inputs and very valuable information. I know a little bit about trees. Some people say I'm wooden. I've been hit by a few of them in the past.
That explains a lot.
Yeah, it explains a lot. So when I was 48, 2 years ago, I fell a tree that had a 30-degree lean. And as I was doing the back cut, it broke, went against the lean, hit me in the head, smashed the helmet on my head, rolled down my back, and took my left leg off and put it behind my pelvis. Now that tree looked healthy, but the inside of it was rotten. It was rotten, and the pressure of the branches flicked it back the wrong way. So you can never tell. So I actually really understand, Emma, the complexities of writing some rules about how best to work with trees, because they are not pegs. Everyone is different. And sometimes their problems are hidden well beneath their bark layers and what's visible to the eye. I think having a best practice, Emma, is going to be very challenging. So the Forestry Association does have some guidance, and I presume you've got that and read that stuff. But when you're dealing with the native trees, it is more challenging. The other thing I would note that might be use to you is we have some excellent contractors out there, both internal staff but also our contractors, who have a lot of knowledge, and I'm sure you'll be using those. Okay, great. My last question is to you, Rod. That is about the contracts and the selection of the contractors. Could you just talk us through the process about how we actually select the contractors to do our work, whether it's felling trees or pruning trees in our council-owned areas?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the comments, and thanks through the chair. Look, we have an arboricultural contract that was part of a procurement process that we all went through, and everyone remembers Project 17 when we done our maintenance and we did arboriculture again, and that went to the market, and that was We had a number of people come back on that tender process. It was awarded to a contractor, or majority of it went to Treescapes because the price, I think we actually, at that time, and I think it was reported that we actually added about another 30% value through that negotiation process. And it was part of the Deloitte's review when they said that we added $30 million worth of value back into the community through that Project 17 process around that. So they do the majority of our, all our maintenance, apart from AIM Services, which is our own council department, which has a couple of regions. For tree removal, our teams go through, they have some selected pre-qualified contractors, and the pre-qualified contractors get an opportunity to quote on some of the tree removal that happens around the area, and that work is evenly distributed over a number of different contractors for that type of work, through that process. But it all goes through our procurement process and how we work through council.
Subsequent one, right, have we had the fatalities with our contractors in the tree space or serious injuries in recent times?
Back through the chair, good question. Not in recent time. I do recall one injury where someone did fall from a tree, but to put that in context and why that was an issue, we've got 500,000 trees under our management. We visit 75,000 trees a year. So we're actually going. So over the last 3 years, I can only recall one incident where a staff member was actually injured, but it wasn't a serious injury. But I do recall because we got a report on that.
Thanks, Rod. With my history, I won't apply for a job.
Thank you.
Before I move to Councillor Fletcher, oh no, I better not say it. Sorry, Councillor Kelsby, I won't. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do note that we are not talking about co-governance. We're not talking about the Manga Authority today. We're not talking about regional parks. We are looking more generally at those assessments. And I also note with pleasure that we're really just moving, one step forward in terms of the evolution of policy. So we're not landing today. We are just trying to establish that we have taken into account all of those factors so that we can come up with coherent policy. I do regret, in part, that we didn't hear from those that sought to speak today, because it is one of those really complex areas where, trying to get that contestable policy advice coming through is really important. I understand that they had already been heard at another committee, but in many ways, we're a different committee to Audit and Risk, and I would have probably welcomed just being able to quiz people on some of the things that I've taken an interest in. Just for the record, in Parliament, I introduced on behalf of the Tree Council, the Urban Tree Protection Private Members Bill. And then for my sins, I ended up having to sign the death warrant on the Monterey pine on the top of the tihi, the Manga Kia. And then more recently, when I was chairing Parks and chairing the Domain Committee, we had the oak felling incident, and it really did drive home to me the importance of having adequate assessment measures because of the risk to life and limb. So I might add that I'm also extremely handy with the chainsaw, and I can share many an anecdote at a personal level as well as to my tree felling abilities. And just for the record, so that there can never be any suggestion of conflict for me, although I have never discussed this matter with him, my nephew is James Fletcher, who is the CEO of Treescape. So I have a passing interest in these things. And really what I want to quiz you on, in no way want to be disrespectful of the advice that we've had from officers, but the visual assessment, it's really concerning to me that we might put more weighting on that than perhaps some other forms of methodology. And while you're saying you don't want to have a kind of one size fits all, I'm still really open-minded about how we might go about this assessment. And Mr. Chairman, before they answer, I wonder that you know, this is such an important issue that there might not be a small working group of, just as we have with the weed management group, some working group of councillors that can work, or local board members that can work with officers as we go through this, because I think it is such a critical piece of work. But I'm really interested in what Rod can offer on that information that we might have heard today, if we'd agreed. But I mean, I can only take, Mark Roberts seems to be a well-informed expert in the area, and there does seem to be some conflict in terms of the points of view. And I hasten to add, this has nothing to do with what's happening in regional parks or the Mangara Authority or anything else. This is just how we go about in the most responsible way what we do going forward. So can you give us a little, for those of us who are interested in more detailed information, can you give us a little bit more detailed information on what, if we wanted to go further, what kinds of strategies might we deploy?
We'll just break that. So Emma will update you on the visual tree process, because from an independence point of view, a view around that, and then I can update you on what we do next steps.
Thank you, Councillor. Visual tree assessment. Someone said to me earlier today, it's an unfortunate name of what it is, because it's not just rocking up to a tree and having a look and deciding. I've worked that out from all the questions that I've asked and the review that we've done into what we actually do. I agree the advice that's coming through and that you've all received and we will be attaching does raise questions around VTA and is talking about whether it is a true risk assessment or not. As I said at the beginning, risk assessment at its heart is about understanding likelihood and consequence and working out the appropriate response. And from what I have seen of current practice at council, we do use VTA, and everyone says that quite readily, and that is demonstrated in what we have seen. But we do other things as well. What we have been talking about and what we've started implementing is better documentation around what we do and the assessments, more consistency and tools to help staff so that they do all the steps that you would expect and that the experts who've submitted here would expect to happen, whether it's called VTA and it's that tool that's on that website or not. From a risk perspective, what I care about is whether we are stepping through all the considerations in the same way, appropriately and robustly, recording them, going back and checking that we're doing it, actually, and not doing it, and that it's working to effectively manage the risk. I don't want us to be too caught up, if you like, in what it's called, and whether it's this tool or that tool, because I believe that there's dispute. I've heard the dispute over which tool's better and what to do. So let's work it through. And I think we've got a pathway forward to do that and agree how we're going to do this and which tool is used in which circumstance. We do VTA, and I've had advice that it is a robust way to manage our trees, and the practice is current is good practice. There are differing views on that, and we need to hear those, and we need to understand it, and then we need to respond with how we move forward. And we will be doing that. I've heard the commitments from key officers today, and I believe we will be doing that. Does that appropriately answer the concern, or do you have follow-up questions?
I don't want to monopolise the time of the committee, but it is something I feel quite passionately about. And Mr. Chair, I'm happy to commit personal time with the officers in trying to perhaps go into a little more detail on some of these things. So That's probably as far as I,
Yeah.
in the interest of time, want to
Yeah.
take it.
So I'll get Rod to answer some of the questions you've posed, and then I'll have a comment and then move on with our questions. Rod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question. Look, just to finish off on that visual tree assessment, if you do Google visual tree assessment, and the process you've got to actually go through is actually quite a robust process and to do that. So I do concur with what Emma has just said. In regards to this process now, we are internally looking at this document. We're looking at it and using a lot of experience from what's happening in other areas, what other councils do, what we do as best practice, how we get from good practice to best practice, and how we continue that. And that peer review will be done by external experts. In regards to yourself wanting to have some input, from our point of view, we're happy to communicate with yourself if you want to be, and set up some time to show you and give you comfort how we're working through this and where we will end up at with the final document in around February next year.
Thank you for that, Rod, and I'm sure there's other councillors that may be interested in detail on this as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, that's actually a good point. If they wish to contact you, that's fine, but not setting up a working political party group. Okay, Claire, did you want to say something before we move on?
So perhaps, sorry, also thank you very much for your question, councillor. Just to make a comment, I am proposing that I come back to this committee to be able to provide you with detailed updates on this report alongside Rod. That way you've got the visibility of what we're doing and other members do as well. And equally, when we have the external peer review, which we're proposing would be done by highly qualified specialists in this space, to really test our thinking and the triage process and application process we would use of the various methodologies, then we would certainly bring that back as well, in addition to any feedback that they may be able to provide. So those are other mechanisms too.
Okay. Councillor Henderson, and then Cooper with questions, and then there's only one person so far who is, yours is comment? Okay, I'll go to Councillor Henderson, and then Walker and Cooper will be the two for comment.
Cool, thanks, Chair. Yeah, not being an expert, and I'm about to, with my question, probably prove that fact. But look, my concern is with a flexible system, and I understand there's 100 competing systems, the issue with that is that the public can't rely on that when we're looking at different systems. So how do we propose to address that issue so that people can adjust their behaviour and adjust maybe their views depending on the methodologies that are used, if that makes any sense? And I've got another little follow-up question.
Through the chair, I'm a little bit perplexed by the question, sorry. So if I don't answer it right, you can certainly answer me again. Look, a process, once we document the process that we use, that is going to be a public, it can be public document, and people will be able to review that from our point of view. It's not out to consultation, it is an operational document that we use, and that process will be signed off by the operations team, by our director, but the information from an operational point of view will come back and we'll update you on where that is, and that document will be available for the public to actually review how we go through some of our processes and just make decisions around these things.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And just my final question is, have you been working with the New Zealand Arboricultural Association, and how do they feel about how things are going?
Look, all of our arborists are in lots of different organisations and work back through organisations. I myself haven't contacted the New Zealand arboriculture industry, but I know that Emma, my colleague, and others have contacted a number of councils and other organisations around the country, and we're working with them, and they will certainly have input and review of what we do and update them. Look, we have got a desire to be, to try and lead the way in this as our organisation, by the size and scale we are around this. So it is something we are taking seriously, and we are open to continuous improvement of our processes. And this will be a living document because, as our director just said, technology, systems, climate change, things change all the time. So we need to be able to have it so we can actually change adapt ourselves to be flexible around this.
Councillor Walker, comments now.
comment, Mr. Chair. So look, this is really encouraging that we're putting this in place. I guess my comment is, if we're looking at the bigger issue, the areas that I would identify is around tree selection and maintenance. So tree selection, one, maintenance, and then valuation. And if you look at other cities, and I follow closely, for example, the city of Melbourne and a number of other cities around trees, you go to their website, you'll find there's marvellous information around tree selection, because increasingly you've got disease vectors, you've got climate change, you've got fire, you've got a number of things that critically impact on the selection of trees. And we could be one step ahead, because my observation is that we're continuing to plant trees that are going to be high maintenance and problematic in terms of branch fall and the like over time. So I just toss that in. There's some good stuff out there, and a lot of it, with the exception of natives, we can actually literally pick up from other cities because they've been there and done that. So we don't have to occupy lots of time and effort around some of this stuff. There are other cities that are way ahead of us around trees, in my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Cooper, I think you may be...
Could I? Yep.
Yeah, all
Yeah,
yours.
so thank you. I really welcome having a standard. One of the things I've been worried about is that I live next door to a very well-used park, which has a mix of very, very old pines and new undergrowth of natives that's been building up over the last 25 years or so. And in that big, terrible weather storm we had a couple of years ago, a couple of those trees literally were lifted up and pulled out of the ground, and others have fallen over different times. And what the community say to me is, I'm a bit scared to go in that part of the park or let the kids play there because I don't know what's going to happen with those trees. And so for me, being able, if they are assessed and I'm able to be told, look, we've had a proper assessment, here's the standard, they're okay, that makes it safe because it's a really well-used park. And so for me, that's important. The other thing that's really important for me is that it isn't a political sign-off, because this is operational. This is about the experts. I am not an arborist, and I don't want political making the rules around this. This is really dangerous, and I don't want to be liable for politically signing off something like this when it's around experts. So I really welcome that, and I hope that, you know, there's been some information sent through this morning, which I hope we can put, you know, at least assess and put in that mix. I think that's really important. You know, to do that, we've had a lot of raru around trees, should they come down or not. And to be quite honest, I have a lot of faith in the arborists and our teams, because when people do want trees cut down on public property, you could not, honestly, never happen, because they're deemed healthy, they're assessed. But when we've got dangerous trees, whether we love them or we hate them, we've got to really deal with it, because I don't want to be on the watch of having someone killed by a tree or falling on them. So I'm really welcome this, and thank you for your work. Looking forward to seeing us having a code. Kia ora.
Ka pai. Look, thank you so much, well, to you, Claudia, to you, your team, to Emma, to Rod, to Maureen, to the staff behind us in regards to this. This piece of work is obviously operational, but it's going to be something that will end up hopefully guiding everything else that we have around our rākau and our ngahere. So look, I just want to mihi to you. So it's been moved and seconded. So I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. To the committee, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, thank you so much. We've finished early. Pardon? No, that's all done. We did that just before lunch. And 17, that's the only one, is there's no extraordinary items. So I'll move that.
No, you don't need to.
And I just didn't have to move it, so it's gone. Just want to acknowledge again our members of the public, just to say thank you so much for the long waits. But again, thank you. Look, to to Theo and to Dan, again, from Red Badge, just staying here so long, thank you so much as well. So, ko mutu, it's finished, thank you so much. Bye-bye. See you online. Fa.
Thank you, Rob.